Hi, my name is Jack Topkoff, and nuclear power plants is safe is my topic. A brief history would be many countries have used nuclear power, and currently 31 countries still use this nuclear power. Only 7 plants have any sort of accidents through the 1940s and 1950s during the World War. Most of the scientists worked on developing the atom bomb, but shortly after they quickly transitioned to attempt to harness the nuclear energy to produce electricity. On June 27, 1954, the first ever nuclear-powered electricity generator was built and operated. The first generator had a design capacity of 5 megawatts. In today's world, a plant in Japan is currently the world's largest nuclear power plant with a net capacity of nearly 8,000 megawatts. Throughout the history, they've produced different amounts of energy. For example, the first power plant generated in the first power plant in 1954 generated about 5 megawatts. But today, in 2019, we produce about 7,965 megawatts. For comparison, 1 megawatt produces 1,000 kilowatts. 1 megawatt can supply power for an average of 650 homes. Nuclear power operates about 10% of the world's electricity. France, for example, relies heavily on nuclear energy, providing about 71% of the country's electricity. The USA is the largest producer of nuclear energy, yet only 19% is utilized for the electricity. Hot in the news today, in people's mind, is climate change. Burning fossil fuels seems to be what's going to be the end of us all. Heating up the planet is dangerous and has many negative side effects in nature. We do not have to continue with this trend, though. Nuclear power plants are one way you could do this. The greenhouse gases such as carbon and methane are not emitted into the atmosphere when operating a nuclear power plant. They are a clean source of energy and could save the planet, our home. One of the pros would be how inexpensive operation is. The main fuel for a nuclear power plant is uranium, and it's relatively inexpensive. Even with the construction and setup, a nuclear power plant, the cost of running and operating a power plant is very low. For example, in 2008, nuclear power plant owners in the U.S. spent an average of just 49 cents per kilowatt hour for fuel and 1.37 cents per kilowatt per hour for non-fuel operations and maintenance. This is very cheap when compared to oil and gas. Low cost seems to be a positive in that aspect. On the right-hand side, you can see that uranium is on a decline on monthly fuel costs. Dependability. Nuclear power plants have been in use for over 60 years, and they've seen ups and downs. Power plants could last anywhere from up to 40 to 60 years. For example, the first ever power plant was decommissioned in just the year 2000. More modern models of the nuclear power plant could last into the upper 50-year life cycle. Other methods of energy such as solar and wind depend on the weather. Nuclear power plants run year-round without disruption. Proficiency is important when talking about any kind of energy. Solar and wind energy seem to be the best renewable solutions when talking about greenhouse gas emissions, yet they both lack energy proficiency when compared to fossil fuels. One does outrank fossil fuels, though, and that's nuclear energy. It is a powerhouse when proficiency is on the table. It has higher density than fossil fuels. The amount of fuel and power in the nuclear plant is much less than those other kinds of power plants. Energy released from the nuclear power plants and nuclear fission is approximately 10 million times greater than those by fossil fuel atom. On the right side, I just added a diagram of nuclear fission. There are many cons, there's few cons when talking about nuclear power plants, and one of them is the impact it has on the environment. A counter-argument to nuclear power plants would be its environmental impact. Though it does not give off any greenhouse gases, it does have somewhat of a negative impact. It's due to the radioactive state the uranium is left in after it's used. Uranium is the primary fuel, and it does have to be mined, and this is no easy process, and it can be dangerous. Transportation to the sites could let off radiation to those who are exposed to it, such as the driver or passengers, and disposing of it is pretty hard and tedious. If just thrown in dumps, this could potentially harm the ground, air, and our water. But a rebuttal against this argument would be the lack of safe disposals. Primarily in the U.S., power plants have very little government approval sites to dispose of the waste, and those are necessities. With the help of government, plants could properly dispose of the waste and do less harm to the environment than those of fossil fuels. Another con would be nuclear accidents. Throughout history, there's been 7 nuclear accidents in our short history with the nuclear power plant. But these accidents happen to technical difficulties and 1 to a natural disaster. 4 of those were caused by technical difficulty. They had coolant and water / steam related issues. These were coolant backups, leakage, and one had a steam bubble that popped and caused an explosion. The only one that caused a large amount of casualties, though, was the one in Japan in 2011. The deaths were caused not by the explosion or the meltdown, but due to the tsunami and earthquakes nearby. Another note to add would be the 220,000 that were evacuated from Chernobyl, but there was much less casualties than those in Japan. A rebuttal to this would be to avoid these kinds of accidents, we would need time. We always need time. Nothing is perfect when created. As time continues, we learn from our mistakes. In 8 years, there hasn't been an accident related to the nuclear power plant. Unfortunately, this is how humans fix and learn problems. We are also starting to build plants inland to avoid earthquakes and other natural disasters. A con could be high costs. When there's waste from the plant, it is very hot and it can cost a lot in the process we need to get to dispose of it properly. Right now, businesses wait and let the waste cool over a period of time. And during cooling, it needs to be maintained, watched over, and kept from falling into the wrong hands due to its radioactive state. This adds to cost because of labor and time. Not to mention the process it takes to construct the plant has to be approved internationally as well as by the communities that are close. Plants can be large and require high amounts of labor before it can be operated. This goes hand in hand with environmental impacts. If the business had proper disposal sites, we could avoid these issues of high costs with the disposal process. If they had those sites, they could safely dispose of waste in a timely manner. Construction is high, but from the benefits from the power plants outweigh the cost. The inexpensive cost, no greenhouse gas emissions, and low cost of operation is enough to convince people to support the nuclear power plant. One would be that uranium is a non-renewable energy source, as it is the primary energy source of a nuclear power plant. Uranium is non-renewable, and it's the same as fossil fuels. On Earth, there are other renewable sources that we can harness, such as wind and solar. Those are infinite resources. But uranium does have to be mined, and it's just far superior than fossil fuels. It is estimated that we have uranium in the Earth's crust to last us 70 to 80 more years. There's about 40 trillion tons of uranium left in the crust for us to mine and use. Other non-renewable sources are running low, such as fossil fuels, and emit dangerous greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, where nuclear power plants do not. So, the question is it safe? Nuclear power plants harnessed for electricity is safe, and the positive heavily outweigh the negatives. We have large problem of climate change on our hands, and we are headed for extinction. Many problems have come from climate change, and we must act fast. Countries such as Ukraine, Hungary, and Slovakia are relying on more than 50% of their electricity coming from nuclear power plants. France, which is a major climate change kind of activist country, They rely on 72% of their electricity coming from nuclear power plants. That was collected in 2018. This is to emit lower greenhouse gases. These countries not only paved the way for other countries to follow, but also showed that this power can be harnessed safely. The TED Talk from T. Boone Pickens, Let's Transform Energy with Natural Gases. He speaks briefly about nuclear energy towards the end, and he states it is a safer alternative to fossil fuels. At the end, they questioned him, and one of the alternatives to the natural gas he was talking about was power plants. So where to next? Utilizing this energy from power plants, we could easily lower the greenhouse gases by a large amount. Lowering the amounts of gases we could save the Earth's scientists are estimating to die out by 2050. We're on a decline, and with the help of clean power such as nuclear power plants, we can start on the incline. On the left, you can see that I showed a little graph declining, but we can potentially do this with greenhouse gas emissions. That's what it's supposed to represent. This is my reference pages. I believe I used 8, and thank you for listening.